James Carter froze as he saw Titan, the canine who took a bullet for him, now cowering in a filthy kennel, eyes haunted, his neck oozing blood from a jagged scar that screamed of torture. Who could be so cruel as to turn his loyal partner into this trembling shell after 5 years apart? A crumpled note slipped from the kennel's lining, its scrawled words stopping his heart. If it lives, all will die. What horrifying secret binds Titan's fate, and can their bond survive its deadly grip? Subscribe now to uncover a story that'll leave you in tears. James Carter froze as he saw Titan, the canine who took a bullet for him, now cowering in a filthy kennel, eyes haunted, his neck oozing blood from a jagged scar that screamed of torture. Who could be so cruel as to turn his loyal partner into this trembling shell after 5 years apart? A crumpled note slipped from the kennel's lining, its scrawled words stopping his heart. If it lives, all will die. What horrifying secret binds Titan's fate, and can their bond survive its deadly grip? Subscribe now to uncover a story that'll leave you in tears. The call had come just after midnight, jarring James from a restless sleep in his isolated cabin on the outskirts of Oakridge. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Emily Harper, the local veterinarian whose soft tone couldn't mask the urgency beneath it. "James, it's about a German shepherd we just brought in. You need to see him." He'd grumbled something about not being in the market for a pet, his voice rough from disuse. But Emily's next words hit him like a freight train. "He's got a police tattoo in his ear, and his microchip lists you as his handler. James, it's Titan." Titan. The name sliced through 5 years of scar tissue, dragging up memories James had buried deep. The crack of gunfire, the searing pain in his leg, and the warm weight of Titan's body shielding him as bullets flew. That night had ended their careers. James with a shattered femur, Titan whisked away to what he'd been told was a peaceful retirement with a family out of state. Captain Daniel Pierce had promised him that much while James lay in a hospital bed, doped up on morphine and grief. 5 years of silence, of believing Titan was chasing tennis balls in some suburban backyard, only for this call to rip that illusion apart. The drive to the Greenfield Animal Shelter was a blur, his old pickup rattling over frost-cracked roads as his mind raced. Oakridge slept under a blanket of stars, its quiet streets a stark contrast to the storm brewing in James's chest. He'd built a life here after the force, alone, deliberately so. The solitude a balm for wounds that never fully healed. Civilian life chafed like an ill-fitting coat, but it was better than the pitying stares of old colleagues. Now Titan's name echoed in his skull, a ghost he couldn't outrun. The shelter was nearly deserted when he arrived, just a flickering fluorescent light and the distant bark of strays greeting him. Emily met him at the door, her hazel eyes shadowed with concern. "Thanks for coming so fast," she said, leading him through a maze of kennels where dogs pressed hopeful noses to the bars. Their wagging tails faded into background noise as James's focus narrowed to the last kennel in the row. "We've kept him separate," Emily warned, her voice dropping. "He's reactive. I need to prepare you, James. He's not the dog you remember." Nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. Titan lay curled in the corner, as far from the gate as the cramped space allowed, his once glossy black and tan coat dulled to a patchy gray, matted with dirt and dried blood. His ribs jutted beneath taut skin, and his amber eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that once tracked suspects with laser focus, stared blankly at the wall around his neck. A jagged scar circled like a noose, the flesh raw and puckered as if something had bitten into him over and over. James's knees buckled and he dropped to a crouch, the cold concrete biting through his jeans. "Titan," he whispered, voice breaking. "It's me! It's Jim!" Titan's ears twitched, a faint quiver, but he didn't move. No tail wag, no spark of recognition, just a hollow shell where his partner used to be. James's throat tightened, a mix of rage and sorrow clawing up from his gut. "What the hell happened to you?" he murmured, reaching a trembling hand toward the gate. Titan's lip curled slightly, a weak warning growl rumbling from his chest, and James pulled back, heartbreak slicing deeper than any bullet ever had. "He was found near the old quarry," Emily said, crouching beside him, her tone clinical but soft. "Animal control brought him in yesterday, malnourished, injured, terrified. Physically, he'll survive with care, but his mind, whoever had him, they broke him, James." She hesitated, then pulled a folded scrap of paper from her pocket. "This was tucked under the kennel lining. I don't know what it means, but it's why I called you." James took the note, his fingers unsteady as he unfolded it. The words were scrawled in black ink, jagged and hurried. "If it lives, all will die." His breath caught, a chill racing down his spine. "What is this?" he demanded, voice low and dangerous. Emily shook her head. "I don't know, but that scar, the way he reacts, someone tried to kill him, James, and I think they're still out there." Before he could process her words, the shelter's silence shattered. A deafening crack split the air, and the window above Titan's kennel exploded inward, glass raining down like shrapnel. James threw himself over Emily instinctively, shielding her as a bullet buried itself in the wall inches from Titan's head. The dog surged to his feet, a guttural snarl ripping from his throat as he lunged toward James, not to attack, but to protect, his frail body pressing against James's side like a shield. The growls vibrated through him, fierce despite his weakness, and James's heart pounded with a mix of fear and awe. "Titan, easy," he barked, wrapping an arm around the trembling dog. The shelter fell silent again, save for Titan's shallow panting and the distant wail of a siren. James's phone buzzed in his pocket and he yanked it out with a shaking hand. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Against his better judgment, he answered, pressing it to his ear. A distorted voice rasped through the line, cold and mechanical. "You shouldn't have brought it back, Carter. Return it, or Oakridge pays the price." The call cut off, leaving James staring at Titan, whose amber eyes now locked onto his, not with recognition, but with a desperate, primal need. "I'm taking him home," James said, his tone brooking no argument as he stood, ignoring the protest in Emily's eyes. "He's my partner. Whatever this is, we face it together." He opened the kennel gate, coaxing Titan out with a gentleness he hadn't used in years. The dog followed, stiff and wary, but close, a shadow of the canine he'd once been, yet still tethered to James by something unbreakable. As they stepped into the frigid night, James glanced at the note clutched in his fist. "If it lives, all will die." The words burned into his mind, a riddle wrapped in a threat. Who had Titan been with all these years, and what secret was worth killing for? Worth killing him for? One thing was certain. The reunion he'd dreamed of was no happy ending. It was the beginning of a nightmare. James Carter's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. The crumpled note, "If it lives, all will die," burning a hole in his pocket. Titan sat in the passenger seat of the old pickup, his frail body pressed against the door, amber eyes darting to every shadow outside. The bullet hole in the shelter wall replayed in James's mind, a stark reminder that whatever had broken Titan wasn't done with them yet. He glanced at the dog, whispering, "We're in this together now, buddy." But the words felt hollow against the weight of the unknown threat lurking in the night. The drive back to his cabin was tense, the rural roads of Oakridge winding through skeletal trees under a moonless sky. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps, every flicker of headlights a potential sniper. Titan's shallow panting filled the silence, his head low but ears twitching, alert despite the exhaustion etched into his bones. James's leg ached, the old injury flaring up from the adrenaline, but it was nothing compared to the ache in his chest. 5 years ago, he'd watched Titan being loaded into a van, Captain Pierce's voice echoing in his ears, "He'll be safe, Jim, a good family's waiting." Now, that lie gnawed at him, sharper than the bullet that had ended their partnership. When they reached the cabin, James secured Titan inside, locking every door and window, though he knew it wouldn't stop whoever was out there. He set up a makeshift bed in the living room, a pile of blankets near the fireplace, but Titan ignored it, choosing instead to station himself by the front door, his back to the wall, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. James crouched beside him, running a hand over the dog's matted fur, feeling the tremor beneath. "What did they do to you?" he murmured, tracing the jagged scar around Titan's neck. The growl that answered was soft, almost mournful, and it broke something inside James. Sleep wasn't an option, not with Titan's life and maybe his own hanging by a thread. He called Dr. Emily Harper at dawn, her voice groggy but sharp when he explained the shooting. "Bring him to my clinic," she insisted. "There's something off about that scar. I need to check him properly." An hour later, James pulled into the clinic's gravel lot, Titan limping beside him, the morning mist clinging to their clothes like a shroud. Emily met them at the back door, her medical bag slung over her shoulder, and led them to an exam room bathed in sterile white light. Titan resisted at first, a low growl rumbling as Emily approached with a stethoscope, but James knelt beside him, murmuring, "It's okay, buddy, she's here to help." The dog relented, lying stiffly on the table, his eyes never leaving James. Emily's hands moved with practiced care, checking his vitals, but when she palpated his shoulder, her brow furrowed. "There's something here," she said, grabbing a portable ultrasound from a drawer. The screen flickered to life, revealing a small metallic object embedded near Titan's shoulder blade. Not a microchip, but something more complex, with faint wires branching into his muscle tissue. "What the hell is that?" James demanded, his voice rising as panic clawed up his throat. Emily didn't answer right away, her focus on the screen. She adjusted the probe and a grainy image sharpened, a device no bigger than a dime pulsing faintly. "This isn't standard," she said finally, her tone tight. "It's a transmitter, sophisticated military grade. I've seen prototypes in research papers, but never in a living animal." She met James's gaze, her eyes wide. "We need to get it out now." The procedure was quick but harrowing. Titan whimpered under sedation, his body twitching as Emily made a precise incision, extracting the device with forceps. Blood streaked her gloves and James clenched his fists, fighting the urge to look away. When she placed the tiny object in a sterile tray, it beeped once, a sharp, insistent sound, and a string of code flashed across a nearby monitor. T93, Phase 1, erratic. The room spun. James grabbed the table for support, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Eradicate, Oakridge? What does that mean?" Emily's face paled. "It means Titan's not just a survivor. He's a weapon." She hesitated, then added, "That note. If it lives, all will die. It's not a threat. It's a warning. Someone planted this in him, and they're planning something big." James's mind raced back to the call, the distorted voice. "Return it or Oakridge pays the price." His stomach twisted. Grayson Security Solutions flashed in his memory. The name Pierce had mumbled in the hospital all those years ago, the company that supposedly rehomed Titan. He stormed out of the clinic, Titan trailing despite his groggy state, and drove straight to the Oakridge Police Department. Captain Daniel Pierce was in his office, gray hair thinning, lines deeper than James remembered. The man looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Carter? What's this about?" James didn't bother with pleasantries, slamming the transmitter onto Pierce's desk. "You told me Titan was safe. You lied. What the hell is this?" Pierce's expression shifted, guilt flooding his eyes as he picked up the device. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment James thought he'd deny it. Then Pierce's voice cracked. "I didn't know what they'd do, Jim. Grayson came to me after your shooting, said they'd take Titan, use his skills for private security. They offered a donation to the K9 unit, and..." He trailed off, tears welling. "My son Tommy, he's a cop in Spencer County. Grayson's got him. They threatened to kill him if I didn't hand over Titan." James's fist crashed onto the desk, rattling coffee mugs. "You sold him! You sold my partner to save your kid!" Pierce flinched, but didn't argue. "I thought it was just training," he whispered. "But last month I heard rumors. Dogs disappearing, Grayson's people asking about Titan. I've been digging, quietly. There's a facility in Spencer County. That's where Tommy is. Maybe Titan's answers too." James stared at Pierce, rage warring with the flicker of pity he didn't want to feel. Titan pressed against his leg, a low whine escaping, as if sensing the betrayal. "Give me the address," James growled. Pierce scribbled it on a napkin, hands trembling. "Be careful, Jim. Grayson's not just a businessman. He's a monster." As James left, Titan's steady gaze met his, a spark of the old trust buried beneath the trauma. The address burned in his hand, a lead to the nightmare that had stolen 5 years from them, but the code, "Eradicate Oakridge," echoed louder. What had Grayson turned Titan into, and could James save him before it was too late? James Carter's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he sped towards Spencer County, the napkin with Pierce's scribbled address crumpled in his fist. Titan sat beside him, still groggy from the sedative, his bandaged shoulders stark against his matted fur. The transmitter's code, T93, Phase 1, "Eradicate Oakridge," pulsed in James's mind like a ticking bomb, each mile amplifying the dread gnawing at his gut. He'd called Detective Maria Lopez on the way, her sharp voice cutting through the static. "I'm in, Carter. Grayson's been on my radar for years. This ends now." Her unmarked sedan waited at a gas station just outside Oakridge, and together they barreled into the unknown, Titan's steady breathing the only anchor in the storm. The facility loomed on the horizon as dusk bled into night, a sprawling abandoned factory masquerading as a cattle farm, its rusted silos piercing the sky. Barbed wire glinted under sodium lights, and the faint hum of generators buzzed like a swarm of angry wasps. Maria scanned the perimeter through binoculars, her jaw tight. Heavy security, cameras, motion sensors, armed patrols. "This isn't a training ground, it's a fortress," James nodded, his eyes on Titan, who stared at the factory with a tense stillness that chilled him. "He knows this place," James murmured, stroking the dog's head. "He escaped from here." They parked a half-mile out, cloaked by dense woods, and moved on foot, Titan leading with a limping gait that belied his focus. Maria slipped a silenced pistol into her holster, her dark eyes flickering with a haunted edge. "I worked counter-terrorism 5 years back," she confessed as they crept through the underbrush. Grayson's name came up, Black Ops, experimental programs. I got close, but Brass shut me down, said it was above my pay grade. Now, I'm wondering if Titan was part of it. James's stomach twisted. "You think they turned him into some kind of weapon?" Maria didn't answer, but her silence was damning. The fence was their first hurdle, 8 feet of chain link topped with razor wire. Titan paused at a drainage culvert, nosing the muddy ground where erosion had carved a shallow gap. James and Maria dug with their hands, dirt caking their fingers until the space widened enough to crawl through. Titan went first, belly scooting with a grace that defied his condition, and James followed, the cold metal grazing his back. Maria came last, muttering, "If we die here, I'm haunting you, Carter." Inside, the air reeked of antiseptic and decay, a sterile facade masking something rotten. They slipped into a side entrance, a maintenance door propped open with a cinder block, likely a guard's smoking spot. The corridors were stark white, lit by flickering motion sensors that forced them to dart between shadows. Titan navigated with uncanny precision, his ears swiveling at sounds too faint for human ears, leading them deeper into the maze. "He members," Maria whispered, awe tinged with dread. James nodded, his heart pounding. Whatever Grayson had done, it hadn't erased Titan's instincts. They found the kennels first, a row of steel cages more akin to prison cells than dog runs. 12 German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and Dutch shepherds lay inside, their bodies gaunt, eyes ranging from restless to vacant. Each wore a collar like the one removed from Titan, wires snaking into their necks, hooked to monitors blinking with data. James's breath caught as he approached the nearest cage, a Malinois labeled T96, Advanced Combat Protocol. The dog didn't move, its chest rising faintly, its gaze fixed on nothing, a 1,000-yard stare that mirrored Titan's when they'd reunited. "Oh God," James choked, reaching for the latch. "Hold on, buddy, I've got you." The moment he opened the cage, T96 convulsed, A sharp beep sounded from its collar, and the dog's body seized, foam bubbling at its mouth as it collapsed, lifeless. James stumbled back, horror clawing up his throat. "No!" he shouted, dropping to his knees beside the still form, hands hovering uselessly. Titan whined, pressing his nose to the bars, a mournful sound that echoed in the sterile space. Maria grabbed James's arm, her voice urgent. "Carter, stop! They're rigged, self-destruct mechanisms, we can't touch them." Tears stung James's eyes as he stared at T-96's broken body. "I was too late," he whispered, the weight of failure crushing him. Maria pulled him up, her grip firm. "We're not done yet. There's more here, we need to keep moving." Titan nudged James's leg, amber eyes pleading, and he forced himself to stand, though every step felt like betrayal. The next room was worse, a control center lined with screens and humming servers. One monitor displayed a map, Oakridge circled in red alongside 3 other cities, Denver, Atlanta, Chicago, each marked with dates and coordinates. Another screen looped footage of a German Shepherd Titan in a sterile arena, a metal collar shocking him as he hesitated to attack a dummy. James's fists clenched, nails biting into his palms. Beside the monitors, a file labeled Deployment Schedule detailed shipments of chemical weapons hidden in Federal Reserve containers set for transport in days. A voice crackled from a speaker, Victor Grayson's, cold and precise. "If Carter interferes with Phase 1, activate T-93, let it self-destruct and release the payload." James froze, his blood turning to ice. "Payload?" he rasped, turning to Titan, who stood rigid, ears pinned back. Maria scanned the files, her face ashen. "Chemical agents, enough to wipe out a small city. Oakridge is the test run. If you'd left Titan at the shelter—" She didn't finish, but the implication hit like a sledgehammer. Titan wasn't just a weapon, he was a walking apocalypse, and every second he lived brought Grayson closer to pulling the trigger. Before they could process it, an alarm blared, a low, pulsing wail that vibrated through the walls. "Motion sensors," Maria hissed, drawing her pistol. "They know we're here." James grabbed Titan's collar, old instincts kicking in, but a muffled explosion rocked the corridor behind them. Dust rained from the ceiling, and Maria cursed, clutching her leg as shrapnel grazed her calf, blood seeping through her jeans. "Go," she shouted, shoving James forward. "I'll hold them off. Get Titan out." James hesitated, torn between his partner and his ally. "I'm not leaving you," he growled, but Maria shoved her gun into his hand, her eyes fierce. "You don't have a choice. Save him. Save Oakridge." "I'll be fine. Go!" Titan barked, sharp and insistent, tugging James toward an exit. With a guttural yell, James ran, Maria's silhouette fading into the smoke as gunfire erupted behind them. They burst into the night, the factory's lights blazing like a predator's eyes. Titan staggered but kept pace, blood dripping from his shoulder. James's mind raced. Grayson's plan, the dead dog, Maria's sacrifice. What had he stumbled into? And could he trust Pierce's intel? Or was this a trap all along? James Carter stumbled through the woods outside the Spencer County facility, his breath ragged, Titan's blood-streaked fur brushing against his leg. The explosion's echoes still rang in his ears. Maria's last shout, "Save him, save Oakridge," a knife twisting in his chest. He'd left her behind, her blood staining the factory floor, and every step away felt like abandoning a piece of himself. Titan limped beside him, the bandage on his shoulder soaked crimson, his amber eyes darting to the shadows as if sensing the hunters closing in. James clutched Maria's pistol, the weight of it a grim reminder of the stakes. Grayson's plan to turn Titan into a chemical weapon wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. They reached the truck under a sky bruised with storm clouds, the air thick with the scent of pine and impending rain. James hoisted Titan into the passenger seat, his hands trembling as he checked the dog's wound. "Hang in there, buddy," he whispered, voice cracking. Titan whined softly, nudging James's hand with a cold nose, a flicker of trust that nearly broke him. He slammed the door and peeled out, tires kicking up gravel as headlights flared in the rearview mirror. A black SUV roared onto the road behind them, its tinted windows glinting like predators' eyes. Grayson's men. The chase was relentless, a high-speed dance of death on the narrow highway. Bullets pinged off the truck's tailgate, shattering the back window in a spray of glass. James swerved, adrenaline surging, but a sharp yelp from Titan yanked his focus. The dog had lunged to the driver's side, his frail body shielding James as shards rained down. "Titan, down!" James barked, shoving him back, but Titan's growl was fierce, protective, a shadow of the canine he'd once been. Blood dripped from a fresh cut on his flank, and James's heart seized. "You're not dying on me," he gritted out, flooring the gas. The SUV gained ground, its driver relentless, until James spotted a dirt turnoff a logging road cutting through the forest. He veered hard, branches clawing at the truck as they plunged into darkness. The pursuers followed, but the terrain slowed them, tires bogging in mud. James pushed the truck to its limit, weaving through trees until a sharp drop loomed ahead, a ravine too wide to cross. He slammed the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt inches from the edge. The SUV screeched behind them, doors flying open as two figures in tactical gear emerged, rifles raised. James grabbed Titan and bolted, diving into the underbrush as bullets tore through bark. They scrambled down a slope, Titan's three-legged gait faltering until they hit a shallow creek bed. The icy water soaked James's boots, but it masked their scent and muffled their steps. He crouched behind a fallen log, Titan panting beside him, and waited as flashlight beams swept the woods above. Minutes stretched into eternity, the men's shouts fading into the wind. When silence fell, James exhaled, stroking Titan's head. "Good boy," he murmured, voice thick. "You're still the best damn partner I've ever had." They couldn't stay. Grayson knew they'd escaped, and Maria, God, Maria, might not have. James drove to his sister Sarah's house on the edge of town, a modest ranch backed by dense forest. She met them at the door, her freckled face paling at the sight of Titan's blood and James's haggard expression. "Jim, what the hell's going on?" she demanded, ushering them inside. He collapsed onto her couch, Titan curling at his feet, and spilled everything: the shelter, the transmitter, the factory, Maria's sacrifice. Sarah's eyes welled as she knelt beside Titan, her nurse's hands gentle on his wounds. "You can't let him die," she said, voice breaking. "Not after all this." James nodded, but the weight of Grayson's plan crushed him. If I don't stop them, he might not have a choice. He called Dr. Emily Harper, who arrived within the hour, her medical bag clanking as she hurried in. She examined Titan under the dim kitchen light, her brow furrowing as she probed his flank. "This isn't just trauma," she said, voice low. "There's something in his blood, traces of a chemical compound I can't identify without lab equipment, and his behavior. He's showing signs of a self-destruct protocol. If they trigger him again, he'll tear himself apart to release it." James's stomach dropped. "Release what?" Emily met his gaze, her eyes grim. "Whatever was in that transmitter, a toxin, a nerve agent, something meant to wipe out Oakridge. Grayson didn't just train him, they wired him to be the delivery system," Sarah gasped, hands flying to her mouth, and James slammed his fist on the table, rattling dishes. "They turned my dog into a goddamn bomb?" Titan whined, pressing against James's leg, and the room spun as rage and helplessness collided. Emily pulled out a handheld scanner, running it over Titan's body. "There's no second device, thank God, but the chemicals in his system, dormant until activated. We can't extract it here, it'd kill him. Our only shot is to stop Grayson before they send the signal." James's mind raced back to the factory files, the Federal Reserve shipments, the map of targeted cities. "They're moving soon," he said, voice hard. "Days, maybe hours. I need to know what Pierce knows." He dialed Captain Pierce, the line crackling before the older man's voice came through, strained and weary. "Jim, you okay?" James didn't waste time. "Your son's in Spencer County and Titan's a walking death sentence. What else are you hiding?" Pierce's silence stretched. then broke with a sob. "Tommy's alive. I got a photo yesterday, him in a cage like those dogs. Grayson's using him to keep me quiet. But Jim, it's bigger than Oakridge. Those shipments, they're not just cash, they're weapons, spread across the country. If you don't stop them—" James cut him off. "Where's Grayson now?" Pierce hesitated. "His main compound, outskirts of Oakridge, but Jim, he's expecting you. He wants Titan back, alive." The call ended, and James stared at Titan, whose ears perked at his name. The dog's loyalty was unshakable, but the cost was mounting. Maria's blood, Titan's pain, a town on the brink. Sarah touched his arm, tears streaking her face. "You can't sacrifice him, Jim. He's family." James's throat tightened. "I know, but if I don't, everyone's dead." Titan looked up, amber eyes clear for the first time since the shelter, and James saw the partner he'd lost, and the weapon Grayson had forged. The clock was ticking, and the choice loomed. Save Titan or save them all. James Carter stood in Sarah's dimly lit kitchen, the air heavy with the metallic tang of Titan's blood and the faint hum of Dr. Emily Harper's scanner. Titan lay at his feet, his bandaged flank rising and falling unevenly, amber eyes locked on James with a trust that felt like a dagger in his heart. The revelation that Titan carried a chemical agent, a death sentence for Oakridge if triggered, churned in James's gut, each breath a countdown he couldn't stop. Sarah's tear-streaked plea echoed in his ears. "You can't sacrifice him, Jim." But Pierce's warning loomed larger. Grayson's compound, the Federal Reserve shipments, a nation teetering on the edge of catastrophe. James's hands clenched into fists, nails biting into his palms as he faced an impossible truth. Saving Titan might mean losing everything else. Emily broke the silence, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I've got a counter-frequency device, experimental, based on trauma research. It might disrupt the self-destruct protocol, but it's a long shot. If it fails or if Grayson's signal overrides it—" She didn't finish, but the unspoken hung between them. Titan would tear himself apart and the toxin would spread. James nodded, his throat too tight to speak, and took the small device. A black box no bigger than a phone, its single button glowing faintly. "How long do we have?" he rasped, glancing at Titan, who whimpered softly as if sensing the stakes. "Hours, maybe less," Emily replied, her eyes flicking to the window where dawn bled through the blinds. "If those shipments are moving today, Grayson's already in position." James's mind raced to the factory files, containers laced with chemical weapons, Titan as the failsafe. He grabbed his phone, dialing Officer Ryan Hayes, the rookie who'd stayed loyal despite the chaos. "Hayes, it's Carter. I need intel on Grayson's compound, now." Ryan's voice crackled through, tense but eager. "Got it." Outskirts of Oakridge, old industrial park, heavy security, guards, drones, the works. "What's the play?" "Infiltration," James said, his tone hard. "Meet me there in 30, bring everything you've got." He hung up, turning to Sarah, who clutched Titan's old collar, a relic from their canine days, its leather worn smooth by years of trust. "Stay here," he told her, but she shook her head, eyes fierce. "He's my family too, Jim. I'm not sitting this out." Emily stepped forward, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "I'm coming. If that frequency fails, Titan needs me on site." James didn't argue, there was no time. The drive to Grayson's compound was a blur of adrenaline and dread. Titan pressed against James's side in the truck, Sarah and Emily in the back. Ryan waited at a ridge overlooking the site, a fortress of concrete and steel, razor wire glinting under floodlights. 6 guards on rotation, drones every 10 minutes, Ryan reported, handing James a pair of night vision binoculars. No sign of Grayson, but Pierce's son Tommy could be inside. James scanned the perimeter, his gut twisting as Titan growled low, ears pinned back. "He knows this place too," James muttered, the dog's memory a map they'd follow into hell. They moved under cover of darkness, Titan guiding them to a weak spot, a drainage grate rusted loose, hidden by overgrown weeds. James pried it open, mud sucking at his boots as they slipped inside, the air thick with oil and rust. The compound's interior was frigid, a labyrinth of corridors lit by flickering LEDs. Titan led with a purpose James hadn't seen since their police days, his limp masked by determination. They passed labs where screens glowed with data, heart rates, brain waves, images of dogs in agony, and James's rage simmered, a fire stoked by every glimpse of Grayson's cruelty. The kennels came next, a sight that stopped them cold. 11 dogs, German shepherds, Malinois, Dutch shepherds, caged like prisoners, their collars blinking with the same tech that had scarred Titan. One, labeled T98 Combat Enhanced, met James's gaze with vacant eyes, its body trembling from exhaustion or pain. Sarah choked back a sob, and James's resolve hardened. "We're getting them out," he whispered, but Emily grabbed his arm. "We can't, not yet. Trigger those collars and they're all dead." Before they could plan, a high-pitched whine pierced the silence, a sound like helicopter rotors spinning up, broadcast through hidden speakers. Titan froze, his body going rigid, a guttural snarl ripping from his throat. James's heart sank as the dog's head jerked, teeth snapping at his own flank, blood welling from the fresh wound. "No!" James shouted, dropping to his knees beside Titan, hands fumbling for the counter-frequency device. "Titan, stay with me!" The dog's eyes widened, pupils dilating with pain and confusion, his growl turning to a pitiful whine as he clawed at himself. Emily lunged forward, shouting, "Hit the button, James, now!" He pressed it, the device emitting a faint hum, and Titan flinched, shaking his head violently. For an agonizing moment, nothing changed. Blood dripped onto the concrete, Titan's body trembling as the protocol fought to take hold. Then, slowly, his snarls softened, his eyes clearing as he slumped against James, panting heavily. James cradled him, tears burning his vision. "Good boy," he choked out, burying his face in Titan's fur. "You're still here." A cold laugh echoed through the corridor, amplified by the speakers. Victor Grayson's voice slithered into the air, smooth and venomous. "Impressive, Carter. I'd hoped T93 would be more resilient, but your sentiment is touching. You've exceeded my expectations again." James's head snapped up, scanning the shadows as Ryan drew his weapon, Sarah clutching Titan's collar like a lifeline. "Where are you, you bastard?" James roared, but Grayson's reply was calm, close enough to watch. "That frequency won't save him forever. Or you. T93 is just the beginning. Walk away, or watch your town burn." The speakers cut off, leaving a ringing silence. Titan whimpered, pressing against James, and Emily checked his pulse, her face grim. "It worked, for now. But Grayson's right, the chemical's still in him. We're on borrowed time." James stood, Titan's weight leaning into him, and met Sarah's tearful gaze. "We end this tonight," he said, voice steel. "No more running." Ryan pointed to a stairwell. "Control room's up there. That's where he'll be." James nodded, lifting Titan despite the dog's weak protest, and led the group forward. Grayson's taunt lingered, "Walk away, or watch your town burn." A dare James couldn't ignore, but as Titan's blood stained his shirt, a darker question gnawed. Could he stop Grayson without losing the only family he had left? James Carter stood in Sarah's dimly lit kitchen, the air heavy with the metallic tang of Titan's blood and the faint hum of Dr. Emily Harper's scanner. Titan lay at his feet, his bandaged flank rising and falling unevenly, amber eyes locked on James with a trust that felt like a dagger in his heart. The revelation that Titan carried a chemical agent, a death sentence for Oakridge if triggered, churned in James's gut. Each breath a countdown he couldn't stop. Sarah's tear-streaked plea echoed in his ears. "You can't sacrifice him, Jim." But Pierce's warning loomed larger. Grayson's compound, the Federal Reserve shipments, a nation teetering on the edge of catastrophe. James's hands clenched into fists, nails biting into his palms as he faced an impossible truth. Saving Titan might mean losing everything else. Emily broke the silence, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I've got a counter-frequency device, experimental, based on trauma research. It might disrupt the self-destruct protocol, but it's a long shot. If it fails, or if Grayson's signal overrides it..." She didn't finish, but the unspoken hung between them. Titan would tear himself apart, and the toxin would spread. James nodded, his throat too tight to speak, and took the small device. A black box no bigger than a phone, its single button glowing faintly. "How long do we have?" he rasped, glancing at Titan, who whimpered softly as if sensing the stakes. "Hours, maybe less," Emily replied, her eyes flicking to the window where dawn bled through the blinds. "If those shipments are moving today, Grayson's already in position." James's mind raced to the factory files, containers laced with chemical weapons, Titan as the failsafe. He grabbed his phone, dialing Officer Ryan Hayes, the rookie who'd stayed loyal despite the chaos. "Hayes, it's Carter. I need intel on Grayson's compound, now." Ryan's voice crackled through, tense but eager. "Got it. Outskirts of Oakridge, old industrial park. Heavy security, guards, drones, the works." "What's the play?" "Infiltration," James said, his tone hard. "Meet me there in 30. Bring everything you've got." He hung up, turning to Sarah, who clutched Titan's old collar, a relic from their canine days, its leather worn smooth by years of trust. "Stay here," he told her, but she shook her head, eyes fierce. "He's my family too, Jim. I'm not sitting this out." Emily stepped forward, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "I'm coming. If that frequency fails, Titan needs me on site." James didn't argue, there was no time. The drive to Grayson's compound was a blur of adrenaline and dread. Titan pressed against James's side in the truck, Sarah and Emily in the back. Ryan waited at a ridge overlooking the site, a fortress of concrete and steel, razor wire glinting under floodlights. 6 guards on rotation, drones every 10 minutes, Ryan reported, handing James a pair of night vision binoculars. No sign of Grayson, but Pierce's son Tommy could be inside. James scanned the perimeter, his gut twisting as Titan growled low, ears pinned back. "He knows this place too," James muttered, the dog's memory a map they'd follow into hell. They moved under cover of darkness, Titan guiding them to a weak spot, a drainage grate rusted loose, hidden by overgrown weeds. James pried it open, mud sucking at his boots as they slipped inside, the air thick with oil and rust. The compound's interior was frigid, a labyrinth of corridors lit by flickering LEDs. Titan led with a purpose James hadn't seen since their police days, his limp masked by determination. They passed labs where screens glowed with data, heart rates, brain waves, images of dogs in agony, and James's rage simmered, a fire stoked by every glimpse of Grayson's cruelty. The kennels came next, a sight that stopped them cold. 11 dogs, German shepherds, Malinois, Dutch shepherds, caged like prisoners, their collars blinking with the same tech that had scarred Titan. One, labeled T-98, combat enhanced, met James's gaze with vacant eyes, its body trembling from exhaustion or pain. Sarah choked back a sob and James's resolve hardened. "We're getting them out," he whispered, but Emily grabbed his arm. "We can't, not yet. Trigger those collars and they're all dead." Before they could plan, a high-pitched whine pierced the silence, a sound like helicopter rotors spinning up, broadcast through hidden speakers. Titan froze, his body going rigid, a guttural snarl ripping from his throat. James's heart sank as the dog's head jerked, teeth snapping at his own flank, blood welling from the fresh wound. "No!" James shouted, dropping to his knees beside Titan, hands fumbling for the counter-frequency device. "Titan, stay with me!" The dog's eyes widened, pupils dilating with pain and confusion, his growl turning to a pitiful whine as he clawed at himself. Emily lunged forward, shouting, "Hit the button, James, now!" He pressed it, the device emitting a faint hum, and Titan flinched, shaking his head violently. For an agonizing moment, nothing changed. Blood dripped onto the concrete, Titan's body trembling as the protocol fought to take hold. Then, slowly, his snarls softened, his eyes clearing as he slumped against James, panting heavily. James cradled him, tears burning his vision. "Good boy," he choked out, burying his face in Titan's fur. "You're still here." A cold laugh echoed through the corridor, amplified by the speakers. Victor Grayson's voice slithered into the air, smooth and venomous. "Impressive, Carter. I'd hoped T-93 would be more resilient, but your sentiment is touching. You've exceeded my expectations again." James's head snapped up, scanning the shadows as Ryan drew his weapon, Sarah clutching Titan's collar like a lifeline. "Where are you, you bastard?" James roared, but Grayson's reply was calm. "Close enough to watch. That frequency won't save him forever, or you. T-93's just the beginning. Walk away or watch your town burn." The speakers cut off, leaving a ringing silence. Titan whimpered, pressing against James, and Emily checked his pulse, her face grim. It worked, for now, but Grayson's right, the chemical's still in him, we're on borrowed time. James stood, Titan's weight leaning into him, and met Sarah's tearful gaze. "We end this tonight," he said, voice steeled. "No more running." Ryan pointed to a stairwell. "Control room's up there. That's where he'll be." James nodded, lifting Titan despite the dog's weak protest, and led the group forward. Grayson's taunt lingered, "Walk away or watch your town burn," a dare James couldn't ignore. But as Titan's blood stained his shirt, a darker question gnawed. Could he stop Grayson without losing the only family he had left? James Carter's boots echoed on the steel stairwell of Grayson's compound. Titan's weight a heavy burden in his arms as blood seeped through his shirt. The counter-frequency device hummed faintly in his pocket, a fragile lifeline against the chemical ticking inside Titan's veins. Sarah clung to his side, her tear-streaked face set with determination, while Dr. Emily Harper and Officer Ryan Hayes flanked them, weapons drawn against the shadows. Victor Grayson's voice still rang in James's ears. "Walk away or watch your town burn," a taunt that fueled his rage, but Titan's shallow panting cut deeper, each breath a plea James couldn't ignore. This was it, the moment to end Grayson's nightmare, or lose everything trying. The stairwell opened into a cavernous control room, its walls lined with screens flickering with live feeds, Oakridge's quiet streets, Federal Reserve trucks rolling out, 11 caged dogs trembling in their kennels below. At the center stood Lieutenant Michael Reed, his police uniform crisp, a smirk curling his lips as he tapped an earpiece. "Carter," he drawled, "you're late." James's blood ran cold. Reed, the department's golden boy, was Grayson's mole. Before he could respond, Reed pressed a button on a console and the helicopter whine blared again, deafening and relentless. Titan convulsed in James's arms, a guttural snarl tearing from his throat as his body arched, teeth snapping at his own flank. Blood sprayed, staining the floor, and James dropped to his knees, pinning Titan down as the dog's claws raked his arms. "Titan, no!" he screamed, voice breaking, fumbling for the counter-frequency device. Emily lunged forward, shouting, "Hit it now!" James pressed the button, the faint hum cutting through the chaos, but Titan's eyes rolled back, foam bubbling at his mouth. For a heart-stopping moment, James thought he'd lost him. Then Titan shuddered, collapsing into a trembling heap, his amber gaze flickering to James with a desperate clarity. Reed laughed, cold and sharp. "Sentiment's weak, Carter. Grayson told me T-93 was his pride, the one that got away. Let's see if it still works." He tapped his earpiece again, barking, "T-93, engage hostile target Carter." Titan's body tensed, a low growl building, and James's stomach dropped as the dog staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his torn flank. Sarah sobbed, "Jim, he's fighting it." But Reed's smirk widened. "He can't. That science unbreakable." James didn't draw his gun, didn't retreat. He knelt eye level with Titan, hands open in the gesture they'd shared 1,000 times: trust, partnership, home. "Titan," he said, voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "It's me. It's Jim. You're not their weapon. You're my family." Titan took a lurching step, teeth bared, his growl a tortured mix of rage and pain. Reed leaned forward, gleeful. "Go on, T-93, finish him." But Titan stopped, inches from James, his body trembling as if torn between two worlds, Grayson's programming and 12 years of loyalty. James reached out, palm up, voice soft. "Remember who you are, buddy, not what they made you. Come back to me." Titan's growl faltered, ears twitching forward, and for a breathless second time froze. Then, with a wrenching whine, he pressed his muzzle into James's hand, collapsing against him, blood soaking them both. James pulled him close, sobbing into his fur. "That's it, good boy, you're mine." Reed's triumph shattered. "Impossible," he snarled, drawing his service pistol. "You can't override that." He aimed at Titan, but James moved faster, shielding the dog as Ryan tackled Reed, slamming him into the console. The gun clattered free and Sarah scooped it up, hands shaking but steady enough to train it on Reed. "Stay down," she snapped, her voice raw with fury. Ryan zip-tied Reed's wrists, his young face grim. "You done, Lieutenant?" The room trembled as sirens wailed outside, police lights flashing through the windows. Ryan's radio crackled with Captain Pierce's voice. "Carter, we've got a warrant. Grayson's pinned, hold tight." But Emily's shout cut through the relief. "James, Titan's fading." She knelt beside them, her hands pressing a gauze pad to Titan's flank, blood pooling too fast. "The self-destruct tore him up and the chemical's active. We've got minutes, maybe less." James's world narrowed to Titan, his partner's eyes dimming as breath rattled in his chest. "No," he choked, cradling Titan's head. "You don't get to leave me, not after this." Emily grabbed her bag, pulling out a scalpel and syringe. "There's one chance." I cut out the damaged tissue, neutralized the toxin with adrenaline, but it's brutal and he might not make it. James's tears fell onto Titan's fur, his voice a whisper, "Do it." The next moments were agony. Emily sliced into Titan's flank with surgical precision, blood gushing as she excised a blackened mass, the chemical's source. Titan whimpered, body jerking, and James held him tight, murmuring, "I got you, buddy, stay with me." Emily injected the adrenaline, her hands slick with red, and Titan convulsed once, then stilled, his chest barely moving. James's sob broke free, raw and guttural, as he pressed his forehead to Titan's. "Don't go, please, don't go." Seconds stretched into eternity, the room silent save for Sarah's muffled cries and the distant thud of boots storming the compound. Then Titan's eyes fluttered, a weak breath shuddering through him, and he licked James's hand, faint but alive. Emily exhaled, tears streaking her face. "He's holding on. Barely." James clung to him, relief and grief crashing together, his voice thick. "Best damn dog in the world." Reed, pinned beneath Ryan, spat. "Grayson's got contingencies. This changes nothing." But the screens flickered, showing Oakridge PD swarming the Federal Reserve convoy, Grayson's men in cuffs. Pierce's voice crackled again. "We've got him, Jim. It's over." James didn't move, his world anchored to Titan's fragile pulse. Over? Not yet. Not while Titan fought to live, and not while Grayson's shadow loomed beyond these walls. Sarah knelt beside him, placing Titan's old collar in his lap, her voice trembling. "He chose you, Jim. He always will." James nodded, tears blurring the room, and held Titan tighter, the weight of their bond a lifeline in the chaos. But as police stormed in, a darker truth settled. This victory came at a cost, and the war might not be won. James Carter knelt on the cold concrete of Grayson's control room, Titan's frail body cradled in his arms, blood pooling beneath them like a dark halo. The chaos of the raid faded into a dull roar, Oakridge PD swarming the compound, Lieutenant Michael Reed in cuffs, Victor Grayson's empire crumbling under flashing sirens. But for James, the world shrank to Titan's shallow breath, each one a fragile thread tethering them together after the brutal surgery that had saved him. Barely. Dr. Emily Harper's hands trembled as she packed away her blood-slick tools, her voice a whisper. "He's stable, James, but it's touch and go. We need a proper facility." James nodded. tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face, unable to let go. Sarah knelt beside him, her fingers brushing Titan's old collar, now stained with his blood. "He's a fighter," she said, voice thick with pride and pain, "just like you." Officer Ryan Hayes stood guard over Reed, his young face hard as he radioed for medics, but James barely registered it. Titan's amber eyes flickered, meeting his, and a weak nudge of his nose against James's hand broke the dam he'd held since the shelter. "You're my best boy," James choked, burying his face in Titan's fur, the scent of blood and loyalty overwhelming. "You always have been." The doors burst open, Captain Daniel Pierce hobbling in, his hospital gown peeking from under a borrowed jacket. His eyes, red-rimmed, haunted, locked on James, then dropped to Titan. "Jim," he rasped, voice cracking. "We got Grayson. Reed's singing shipments intercepted, chemicals secured, Oakridge is safe." He hesitated, stepping closer. "Tommy's here. They found him in a cell downstairs. He's alive, but he was one of them." Grayson turned him. James's head snapped up, rage flaring through his grief. "Turned him?" Pierce sank into a chair, hands trembling. "They broke him. Threats, bribes, I don't know. He's been feeding Grayson intel for months. I traded Titan to save him and he betrayed us anyway." Tears spilled down Pierce's cheeks, his confession raw. "I'm sorry, Jim. I lost my son, and I nearly lost you both. Forgive me." The words hung heavy, a plea James couldn't answer. He looked at Titan, whose life had been bartered for Pierce's failure, and his jaw tightened. "You don't get to ask that," he said, voice low and lethal. "Not yet." Pierce flinched, but nodded, the weight of his guilt a sentence he'd carry alone. Ryan stepped forward, breaking the tension. "Medics are here, sir. We need to move Titan, now." Paramedics rushed in, their stretcher clattering as they lifted Titan from James's arms. He followed, hands hovering, every jolt of the gurney a stab to his chest. Emily joined them, barking orders. "IV fluids, oxygen, stat!" While Sarah clung to James's arm, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. The ambulance ride to Oakridge General was a blur of sirens and antiseptic, Titan's pulse monitor beeping a fragile rhythm. James sat beside him, whispering, "Hold on, buddy. We're not done yet." Though doubt gnawed at him. Had he pushed Titan too far? At the hospital, Emily worked with a trauma team to stabilize Titan, her face etched with exhaustion as she emerged hours later. "He's alive," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. "But he lost too much blood. The chemicals neutralized, but his flank. We couldn't save the leg. We amputated below the shoulder." James's knees buckled and he gripped the wall. The image of Titan, his fierce, unstoppable partner, now three-legged, searing into his mind. "He'll live?" he asked, voice barely audible. Emily nodded, tears welling. "If he fights through the night, yes. He's strong, James. Stronger than we know." The kennels haunted him next. Only 6 of the 11 dogs survived the raid. T-98 and 4 others died when their collars triggered during the chaos, self-destructing in a spray of gore James couldn't unsee. He visited their bodies in the morgue, T-98's vacant eyes staring through him, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I wasn't fast enough." The guilt was a lead weight, crushing him alongside Titan's pain. Had he focused too much on one dog, neglecting the others? The question festered, unanswered. Detective Maria Lopez limped in on crutches, her left leg bandaged from the factory blast, her dark eyes fierce despite the pain. "You made it," she said, forcing a smile. "Told you I'd hold them off." James's throat tightened. He'd left her, and she'd paid the price. "Maria, She cut him off, gripping his shoulder. "Don't! You saved Titan, saved Oakridge. I'd do it again." Her words eased the sting, but not the shame. He'd lost mobility, he'd kept his partner. Was it worth it? Pierce approached again, Tommy in tow, a hollowed-out shell of a man, handcuffs glinting on his wrists. "He'll face charges," Pierce said, voice flat. "Conspiracy, treason. I couldn't save him from himself." James met Tommy's gaze, seeing no remorse, only defiance, and turned away. "Take him," he told Ryan, who nodded, leading the younger Pierce out. The captain lingered, broken. "I'll testify against Grayson, everything I know. It's all I've got left to give." As night fell, James sat by Titan's bedside in the vet wing, the dog's chest rising under a blanket, his missing leg a stark void. Sarah joined him, placing Titan's collar in his hands, clean now, the leather warm from her grip. "He chose you, Jim," she said, tears falling, "over everything they did to him." James traced the worn edges, memories flooding. Titan's alerts, their quiet nights. "I chose him too," he whispered, voice thick. "Always will." Grayson's final taunt lingered. "This changes nothing," a shadow over their victory. The shipments were stopped, but 5 dogs were dead, Maria maimed, Titan forever altered. James clutched Titan's collar, resolve hardening. "We won this round," he murmured, "but I'll be damned if it's over." Titan's eyes fluttered open, meeting his, and in that fragile spark James saw a fight still burning, for them both. James Carter sat on the weathered porch of his cabin, the late summer moon casting silver ribbons across the sprawling fields of Oakridge. 6 months had passed since the raid on Grayson's compound, but the scars, both visible and buried, lingered like ghosts. Titan lay beside him, his head resting on James's knee. The space where his front leg once was, a quiet testament to their battle. The German shepherd's coat gleamed again, black and tan restored to a healthy sheen, but his amber eyes carried a depth James hadn't seen before. Wisdom forged in pain, trust tempered by survival. James ran a hand over Titan's fur, whispering, "We made it, buddy." His voice thick with gratitude and grief. The aftermath had been a storm of its own. Victor Grayson sat in a federal cell, his empire dismantled by evidence from the compound, files, footage, Reed's testimony, linking him to chemical weapons and a sprawling network of corruption. Lieutenant Michael Reed faced trial alongside Tommy Pierce, their betrayal a wound that still festered in the Oakridge. Captain Daniel Pierce had kept his word, testifying against Grayson with a hollow calm, his son's fate a burden he'd carry to his grave. James hadn't spoken to him since that night, the rift too raw to bridge, forgiveness a question he left unanswered, a silence that spoke louder than words. Titan's recovery was a miracle stitched together by Dr. Emily Harper's skill and James's relentless care. The hospital had been a blur of sleepless nights, James at Titan's bedside as machines beeped and IVs dripped, whispering promises through the haze of antiseptics. "You're not leaving me," he'd said over and over, until Titan's eyes opened, weak but alive. The amputation had saved him, the chemical purged from his blood, but the cost was steep. A leg lost, a body forever changed. Emily had offered a prosthetic, her voice gentle. It could help him move like before. James refused, his tone firm. "He's given enough. Let him be Titan, not what they tried to make him." The decision sparked whispers in town. Some called it love, others stubbornness. Sarah supported him, her nurse's hands tending Titan's wounds with a tenderness that mirrored James's own. "He's still your partner," she'd said, sewing a new patch onto Titan's old collar, the K9 unit emblem reclaimed from the past. But the guilt lingered. 5 dogs dead in Grayson's kennels, their vacant eyes haunting James's dreams. He'd visited their graves at the shelter, a row of unmarked stones, and whispered apologies that felt too small. "I should have saved you," he'd said, the wind carrying his words away unanswered. From that guilt grew purpose. James opened Titan's Haven on a plot of land behind his cabin, a sanctuary for working dogs scarred by trauma, funded by donations and his own savings. The first residents were the 6 survivors from Grayson's kennels, their collars removed, their wounds tended by Emily and a team of volunteers. Titan became their silent leader, limping among them on 3 legs, his presence a balm for their shattered spirits. James watched him one afternoon, lying beside a trembling Malinois, T99, his nose nudging the younger dog until it relaxed, eyes closing in peace. "You're teaching them," James murmured, pride swelling through the ache. The haven drew attention. Offers came from the department to return as a canine trainer. Commendations from the mayor for stopping Grayson. James declined them all, his focus on the dogs and the quiet life he'd rebuilt with Titan. "We're done chasing ghosts," he told Sarah, though Grayson's final words, "This changes nothing," lingered like a shadow. Rumors swirled of accomplices still free, a network too vast to uproot. But James pushed them aside. Titan's steady gaze was his anchor, a promise that whatever came, they'd face it together. One evening, as crickets sang and fireflies danced, James led a group of haven dogs through an obstacle course, a rehab tool he'd built from scrapwood and memory. Titan watched from the sidelines, his tail thumping softly, until a young shepherd stumbled, whining in frustration. Without prompting, Titan rose, limping to the pup's side, and nudged it forward, guiding it over a low hurdle with a patience James recognized from their training days. The sight Titan, broken but unbroken, teaching resilience, brought tears to his eyes. He knelt beside him, scratching behind his ears. "Still the best damn partner," he said, voice rough with emotion. Sarah joined him later, a photo in her hand. James and Titan on their first day as a team, both grinning under a summer sun. "Found this in the attic," she said, smiling through tears. "He's come a long way." James took it, tracing Titan's youthful form, and nodded. "We both have." That night, under the moon's glow, he fastened Titan's old collar around his neck, the leather warm, the emblem glinting, and sat with him on the porch, the world still for once. James pulled Titan close, resting his forehead against the dog's, and whispered, "You saved me, Titan. Not just that night, every day since I met you." Titan's tail thumped, a slow, steady beat, and he licked James's hand, his eyes bright with something eternal. The breeze carried the scent of grass and freedom, and James let a single tear fall, not from loss, but from a bond that had defied bullets, betrayal, and science itself. "What do you say, buddy?" he asked, voice soft. "Ready for whatever's next?" Titan's gaze met his, unwavering, and James smiled. A quiet vow to face the future as they always had, together. Oakridge slept beyond the fields, its people blissfully unaware of how close they'd come to ruin, protected by a man and his dog who'd walked through hell to find each other again. The haven's lights glowed in the distance, a beacon of hope born from ashes, and James knew, whatever shadows lingered, Titan's heartbeat beneath his hand was enough. "Good boy," he murmured, the words carrying a lifetime of love. "My good boy." Open question for comments. Was James right to refuse a prosthetic for Titan, honoring his sacrifice, or should he have given him a chance to run again? Do you think their story ends here, or is Grayson's shadow still a threat?